Welcome to Turning Point. I'm your host, Blaine Bertsch, co-founder and CEO at Dryrun cash flow forecasting software, where we help the office of the CFO leave spreadsheets behind and model everything from cash flow through to complex scenarios with clarity and control. And joining me today is Mark Newman of Nomi Health, where he's leading a market-based fight to cut out the middleman and deliver healthcare experiences that employers, providers, and families all truly value. Welcome to the show, Mark.
Thanks for having me.
So before we dive into everything healthcare, I want to know where you got the first inkling that you might want to be an entrepreneur.
I think, so I grew up in Northern Ontario in Canada. I was in the mining industry. My dad was in the mining industry. My mom ran ESL schools on there. And you can always be in a small town like Timmins, 30,000 people, and 60% of them came from other countries, right? It was a kind of a magical place. So both my parents, although they worked in kind of bigger companies, were really kind of entrepreneurial in terms of what they did. So my dad set up new kind of smelting operations, refinery, you name it. So I got to see like a lot of new projects, how that worked. And my mom would just kind of always like new programs, new this, new that. So I think there was always, I got to benefit from like a growth orientation, right? I kind of always in my family. But like most kids and like most people, it all starts with mowing lawns. Starts with mowing lawns, realizing that, you might enjoy making money for doing a thing versus making money by the hour, right? In terms of how you want to go do it. All through junior high and high school, experimenting with like different ideas, different programs, selling different things, different services, whatever. And then the jobs I did get in those kind of formative years weren't like, boring jobs. I got to go work for, there was a restaurant chain called Cafe Rio, where it was like when it was 3 locations and now it's hundreds and hundreds around the world. And I worked for Steve and Trish Stanley, and it was their like 3rd location, their heart and soul, a couple that started this place. And I was 15 years old being a tray boy, and I learned the hustle right from them. It was hour-long lines and, how do you gotta go handle it? And so I was just fortunate to be able to experience a lot of those things. Then when I was in college, I started my first company called HireVue. So HireVue is today, 20 years later, the leading platform for video interviewing, assessment, and AI as it relates to kind of talent acquisition and recruitment. The platform hires 20, to tens of millions of people a year for the biggest companies in the world. But it started as an internship project in college, to kind of get that going and get that moving. So I've never had a real job in my life. I started that in college, the summer before starting HireVue. Animal shows at Hogle Zoo here in Salt Lake City, where I grew up, and somehow, some way, started creating the platform for people to hire for all the big companies. And then after that, we sold that business and realized I'm wildly unemployable, so I just have to kind of keep building companies, and here I am building Nomi today.
That's a common thing with entrepreneurs that we talk to on this show, just serial entrepreneurs, of course. I want to dive into a little bit of that. So what year would that have been that you were in college and you kind of came up with this idea?
So for HireVue, that was like 2003, 2004.
Okay, so
the big pitch was, I was 20 years old, my co-founder Ryan, and the big pitch was, this is TiVo for the job interview. It's going to be great. Yeah. And we said, you're going to take job interviews through webcams. People were like, what are webcams? And for the first, 7-8 years before there was a front-facing Apple camera, we used to ship webcams every single day to hundreds of job candidates to do their job interviews.
I was curious about that because, I remember that time of like, that is early to do something like that.
We did interviews in 100 countries before we did them in all 50 states. Because it would be like, we worked for development banks or mining companies who said, hey, we have this candidate in Ghana. Can you send a package to them for them to do this? And at one point in time, like 6:15 p.m. used to be like my entire life revolved around 6:15 p.m. because that was the Kinko's FedEx shipping cutoff time. And like, we had to get the packages out to like hit that hit that drop off time so they could make it to the airport. And it was fun. Like, we used to take the Logitech CDs and like copy and burn them and then put like a HireVue label on them because that was how we want to show up. And it was great. I mean, what better way to spend your early 20s, right, than doing that? But it was the notion at that point was, when it comes to hiring people, the 2 best ways to hire people are structured interviews and job simulations. Like, tell your story in a consistent way across all candidates and demonstrate your ability to work. right? Kind of go and
Yeah.
do that. Except
Okay.
in real life, that's impossible, right? So as a result, what happens when it comes to college hiring or regular hiring or whatever, you have a little bit of time on your hand, you review a bunch of little random resumes, you think somebody looks great on paper, so then that's who you kind of meet with, and you don't really remember kind of how you're screening or how you're assessing or whatever. And so we want to give people way more of a shot who didn't have one otherwise. Like at my school, we were the closest university to Goldman Sachs's biggest non-New York office, right? And they didn't hire from our school. And so we were like, that's BS. If they just had a chance to meet us, they absolutely would. So let's open up the aperture to meet way more candidates for a role by having them do their interviews and assessments on their own time for review later by managers. And the goal being that you bring kind of candidate 1B, 1C forward, right? And they come from all sorts of different walks of life and places that you didn't initially anticipate. And that started in 2004. And in 2025, it's the same mission, right? Open up access, bring scalability to hiring, bring structure and standardization, but give more importantly, to help people tell their story, demonstrate their ability to work and get shots that they didn't think that they otherwise would.
Well, and I find it really interesting because one of the things I'm always really curious about is, entrepreneurs are always on the lookout for opportunity, like a little magnet, right? And so it was interesting. It's like, okay, this is what was the problem we saw. Goldman Sachs can't get in front of these people. But what I also found really interesting was because of a lot of the timing, like you said, especially in the technology side, the early product market fit was actually kind of opposite. It was international, where it was really hard for people to do that. So where was the leap where you could actually identify that and say, there's this we started thinking we were solving this problem, but it turns out here's an opportunity, a real problem here that we can address today. How did you make that leap?
For sure. So a little bit of luck and a little bit of, foresight, I guess, kind of on here. The luck part was that I was still living at my parents' house. And everyone still had landlines. And I answered the phone one day because, again, my dad was in the mining industry. He had retired at this point. And this guy calls and says, oh, hey, Mark, it's David George Kennedy, one of my first users. And I go, oh, hey, how are you? Good to hear your voice. Oh, well, what are you up to nowadays? I was calling to see your dad. What are you up to nowadays? Oh, I'm doing this, starting this company, this is what I'm doing. He's like, that sounds really cool. He's like, well, I'm hiring for a role in the smelter because he worked at the same mining company. He's like, I'll tell my recruiter to reach out to you to use it. And I was like, yeah, sure. I'm sure that's totally going to happen. Right. Kind of on this. And he's like, yeah, is your dad home? Yeah, he is. Let me go track him down. So I'm like, Dad, picks up the phone, goes and does this. Like 2 weeks later, all of a sudden, our phone rings at my parents' house again. And this guy's on the line and he goes, hello, because my mom answers the phone. And she goes, hello. And she's like, he goes, hi, is this HireVue? And she's like, yes, it is.
Nice.
It was the recruiter that David was using. And he said, here's the number, go call there. So next thing you know, I'm like, hey, first client, let's go do this. And the first three job candidates that got interviewed on HireVue, one was a guy named Larry Fox for a mortgage job that was in like Mesquite, Nevada. And these two guys, Jim Mullen and Chris Anderson, I think it was. They were the first three candidates actually interviewed for jobs. And one was in Ohio, another was in Australia, and another was kind of over here. And I'm like, well, this is what we have to go figure out. And we just kind of went and did it. And just because you did it once didn't mean like it was like a 0 to 1, right? Like you did it. And so next thing you know, like every time these mining companies had these candidates, they'd be like, oh, that thing was really cool. This really worked. All those three people got hired. I met them all in person at random times in my life, on here. And then you just started calling and using it, right? Because they would refer it to the other people dealing with the same problems. So next thing you know, we're in Labrador, we're in Morocco, we're in all 50 countries of Africa, you name it. So then the foresight part, when you're talking about product market fit, was, go where the pain is, kind of on this. And the pain truly was like, if I'm a development bank, I have to accept candidates from all of our member countries. So like the African Development Bank had to accept members from all over Africa. The UN, when they hire us to do this, the Inter-American Development Bank, oil companies, gas companies, whatever it was, right? And if at that moment in time, and they still do, funny enough, in 2025, but at that point in time, we used to just get the Economist magazine and open up. And if you remember, the first few pages were all just job postings, and they were all like expat jobs. Right. And so we would see the companies that were hiring expat jobs. We would then figure out like how to call in there, or call into the phone number on the job, or shoot an email and just say, hey, it seems like you're going to be flying people in from all over the country or all over the world. Have you thought about this?
Mhm.
And so we did them in 100 countries before we did them in all 50 states, because in the US, there was just this like hesitancy. We're seeing video, we're seeing this, we're seeing that. And we had to convince the market that not only was this an amazing tool for efficiency, but but an amazing tool to actually be way more inclusive, because it was structured, it was standardized, and it gave people more opportunity. And that took a
Yeah.
while. That wasn't until 2009 or 10 when we finally did $1 million of revenue, right? You know what I mean? And doing this, and then from there just exploded.
Well, and the amazing part is you actually got to that product market fit, and that found a real problem and did a little pivot there really quite quickly, because sometimes with businesses it'll take years to even get to that point. And then you're building, and then you're going. So but it does remind me, it's kind of funny, because I was thinking back to my very first business. I actually had a job for a while, about
Yeah.
2 years, 3 years. I had a job. I was a designer. I had a design degree. I was a designer in this little studio. And then I just went, no, I'm going out on my own, right? And
Nice.
left. And what's funny is I didn't even think of it till you mentioned it. I think my first client was actually my dad. The same thing, introduced me. He's like,
Yeah.
hey, this friend over here owns a furniture design company that designs furniture. I think you might need some help with something. And sure enough, I went over there and got my first customer, and then you're just kind of off
Yeah.
and running. And I had forgot about that, because I was, going back to about 1999, maybe 2000. So that's
Right.
a while ago, right?
That's what I'm saying. Like, part is this is like you. Anyone wants to think it's like there's a huge difference between like being lucky and being good, but don't just try to claim you're just good at what you do. You always got lucky, And it
You
was
have
just
to. Yep.
funny little things like even along the way. Apple was a big client of ours, right? So this was like apple.hirevue.com, I don't know, or 2010, 11, 12-ish time, 11 time period. And they're like, so what sort of webcams do you need to ship out? We're like, well, until you guys put your head on your shoulders the right way and realize you should put a camera on the front of your freaking device, we're going to be shipping out Logitech cameras, right? It was like, we're going to be doing exactly the thing you don't want us to do to support you, on this thing until that. And they go, right. So what you're telling us is that maybe we should just wait for a few months. I'm like, are you telling us that there's a front-facing camera, kind of coming on this part of it? And we launched the first front-facing, one of the first front-facing video apps, kind of right on this. And it was with the Apple iPad 2 and like the first iPhone on there. And it was because we were doing so much hiring for Apple, and it was like, that was pure luck. There was nothing about it other than that, and just funny things just happens.
Luck, but it was also like there was a lot of foresight in there. I think that you were seeing, what you were seeing and what you were doing was one of the use cases that I'm sure Apple was looking at. It's hard for me to believe, from that 2010-ish timeframe to today, how dramatically everything's changed, and how we're literally sitting here. You're down in Utah. I'm up in Alberta right now. This is recording everything live,
Yeah,
we could stream, but it's
yeah.
the technology is so changed so dramatically in the last like 15 years. It's
But what's nuts,
amazing to me.
what's nuts is we did this exact same thing for job interviews, with no download, no this, no that, in 2011. Right, for live interviews. That was when we were fighting over Flash versus we were the first WebRTC video app because we were signing Apple. They were like, Steve would not approve of this. We're like, no shit, we won't either. We'll be the first WebRTC video app. Let's do this on a 3G connection if needed.
Oh man, that's unbelievable how
It's just fun, right? Like when there was lineups for the new iPhone, right? When there was, we all had our Blackberries and we're like, why would we ever need these app things? It's gone fast, and it's, I've been in HR working for employers my entire career, right? Whether it was hiring or whether it was now healthcare, because employers buy all the healthcare in America, kind of going and doing this. And this space compared to say like a cybersecurity or compared to other categories is a market built for enduring businesses. Right. And it is a Spartan marathon. Like it is a marathon no matter what. Like and you have to fight through it, but it is a marathon. It is not a sprint. You know what I mean? Off of this. And if you know that, you're like, okay, what's our framework for how we want to build this business? Deliver new innovation, drive massive adoption, earn passionate customers, like do that, and then build an enduring business because like you have time. And kind of go and do it. And it's my space. I love it. It's kind of my jam.
Well, and like after talking with, I don't know how many entrepreneurs that we talk with every day, and we're talking with CEOs, CFOs every day, and then doing all these interviews all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And then of course, half my friends are entrepreneurs too. I think the public and sometimes the prevailing thought is that a lot of these startups are quicker than they are. And those are actually the unicorns that
is
actually
completely disconnected to the truth.
Completely disconnected. We always talk about the 10-year overnight success, and sometimes it's 20, right?
Yeah.
And but what I always find a little puzzling is I still don't know if Silicon Valley and, venture cap and that have actually realized that, because they're obsessed with speed. And then they say all these unicorns. I'm like, why you only have a few unicorns? Because you guys rush everybody, because it takes time. That's just, it does. It takes time to do this stuff.
Yeah, it's you learn many things in hindsight, right? Kind of on there. It's the whole Silicon Valley thing. I love being in Utah. We kind of like get to be away from it, right? And we get to be really boring and do B2B apps. It's like in B2B work, and like this is how we do it. We are terrible at consumer here in Utah, and I think that's actually good for your soul. In a advertising supported consumer driven market. Like, I don't know.
Different world.
It's a different world, right? And us boring B2B guys like get a chance to have to live a life and build something enduring.
That's exactly. We're on the same page up here in Alberta, building what we're building. So I'm curious a little bit. Like, so you obviously you got some really good traction. Now you've got some blue chip customers like Apple. How did that, and when did you start thinking maybe it's time to exit this and move on to something else? Like, how did that process to where you actually sold that business kind of come about, and what were some of the challenges in actually executing something like that?
Yeah, well, it turns out when you raise money from venture capitalists, you have to give it back at some point. Like, it's just kind of a weird kind of fact of life, right? You get to keep it forever, and you have to return it back and more, right? So it's kind of this funny thing. For the first 5 years, bootstrapped the business, just surviving. Tried to raise money, never could. And then brought in $1 million, then like $5 million, then like $25 million, then $50 million, and kind of brought in different bits of capital over time. We had gotten to about, let me see, 45, 50-ish $million of run rate, kind of runway at that side of it. Cause we were like, okay, like we did it, and like that was $1 million in 2010 and then, or 11, right. And then just kind of, this is like 17, 18, on there over 6-7 years. Again, overnight success. That was my 12th year into it, 13th year into it. And, once you kind of pass that point, all of a sudden, all the bigger players were like, oh, no, it turns out, we need to kind of think about our strategy and how we do it. Started having some strategic inbounds. What I've learned along the way, though, is when things are going poorly, you naturally are like, as an entrepreneur who's a founder, not like I'd say professional CEO who's gone up the ladder, who then tries to like go like slum it in the startups, startup world, and being like, I know how to do these things. Again, like my last job was at Hogle Zoo. That when you kind of go through this dynamic, you naturally think when things are going terribly that you have to be most paranoid. Doesn't make sense. Like you're kind of like most paranoid, but that's like actually wrong. Like when things are going terribly, no one wants your company and no one wants your job. Like literally,
that's very true.
No one wants it, right? And when things are just kind of coasting, like you've probably been in that experience with boards and stuff. It's like apathy, right? It's like, okay, it's like not exciting, whatever. But it turns out when things are going really well and like you've like finally like hit this and scaled and rolled, turns out everyone wants your company and everyone thinks they can do your job better than you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because, and they start counting other people's money and they're like, if I took over running this company and like kick that like kid who can barely rent a car to the side, they don't even think I could achieve better growth. It's like I could make a buck, right? And that was my lovely front row seat experience, dealing with I brought in a guy to be CEO for a year, a guy named David Bradford, who to this day I would take a bullet for, right? And just like I couldn't even rent a car, and he's like, listen, like you should run this business. Let me help you out on a few things, and kind of do this. And it was an incredible life-changing experience for me that I cherish to this day. And then you bring on more more VCs, you raise more money, you get at an even bigger scale. And then at that point, it's not, has nothing to do with skills and capabilities. It's like, who's the asshole that wants to come knife you, to kind of come, do this part of it.
Yeah.
Excuse my language. And, that was like a front row experience that I got to experience and learn from. And so then at that point, it became, well, I'm not running the business, and someone else is running the business. And we had inbound offers, and you kind of have that. And I was like, tell you what, like we all don't like each other, so let's just go sell the business. And it was like, great, I'm going to sell it to one of my friends. And I'm like, how about I buy it back? And kind of like going and doing that part of it. And then instead somebody else came in and said, how about, we all just coexist and go do that. And in hindsight, it was, it's sometimes good news is bad news is good news. Does that make sense? You need some kind of you need some time to pass to do it. As painful as that experience was, it was the greatest thing that ever happened to me. Right. Because, it was a painful learning experience, but you learned a lot from it. Right. And I was able to not only exit this company that I never thought I ever would. Like I thought it'd just be like my entire career. And I'd always just like watched people like, say, Dave Duffield, the founder of Workday, who had also founded PeopleSoft, who had also founded 5 other companies, right? And he's like saying to me when he's 70 some odd years old, he's like, after 6 companies and 50 years of doing this, I've realized I'm a growth guy. And like when growth stops, I gotta move on. I'm like, you've built multiple $10 billion plus companies. You've had huge impact. And like, you figured that out when you're 70, kind of on here.
Nice.
And I'd meet these guys and I was like, oh, wait, like, I'm only like 33, like I had the greatest I could have ever possibly asked for. Somebody paid a lot of tuition for me to learn on the job, in terms of like kind of go and do this. I got to use other people's money to build an organization that had 400 people working at it and supporting thousands of customers and millions of people doing this. What an amazing place, amazing country, amazing time, amazing this, amazing that. And oh, by the way, I'm going to go do it again. Like now I'm hooked. Let's go do this. And this time I've learned these things. So now let's really go for it, on here. And it was, but it's like this cycle, the psyche and everything of that, of the entrepreneur. Like we're not normals. I can tell you that much.
We're unemployable. I've told my wife before, I'm like, well, there's nothing else I can do. I'm totally unemployable. Like no one would hire me because I wouldn't last today.
Like, I'm totally unemployable. I better go start a thing. And I'm, on this part, but like, it's like, oh, you look around the world and you see problems to go solve rather than just problems that hold people, that kind of, that stop you from doing anything. It's just one of those kind of greatest things. So like you said, like what's accelerated since 2010, what's happened before that, like kind of all here, like we get to live in la la land. Like our worst problems on our worst day are still very first world problems.
Yeah, they really are. They really are. It's, I've especially recently, because it's been a challenge, especially since COVID for business owners and entrepreneurs. And I know we see more and more the challenges that come along with entrepreneurship. And I know I'm one of my other podcasts, my co-host and I we talked, it's the Biz Beer and BS with Mike and Blaine, lighter of approach to a podcast. And, but we started talking about just the challenges for entrepreneurs. And I just stumbled on these stats, and it was like 10 stats that were all just really kind of dire for entrepreneurs in the area of mental health. And it went down, and it was like 75% or 70% struggle with this, but they won't do this, they won't do that. And you get to the very bottom of this list, and then the very last stat was, but 93% would do nothing else. Like, yeah, that's what it is. Just how it is. It's a different, I don't know how we're wired. or broken or whatever, but it's somehow we're all sort of wired the same, and he just wouldn't do anything else.
We did this work at HireVue way back when, where it was, what were the indicators of early career success? Right? Kind of on here. And there were two buckets. There was one around experiences you had, and the second was around how you thought about risk. Okay. And if you think about this, it's like, these are like, you think about these as like frameworks. You're like, huh. So the one around experiences you had, and this did not matter if it was talking about a professional sports, like NFL player, on down to like McDonald's worker or Goldman Sachs analyst. Like, it did not matter. It was consistent. And it was, how old were you when you got your first job and why? Right? Like, how old were you when you first started working and earning money?
My very first job, I was delivering newspapers at like 5 a.m, and it was to make, but I had a goal in mind because I wanted to buy this Palom Peralta skateboard that, like, I had a goal, wanted to buy that skateboard. So I went and got a job, and that was my very first. I haven't thought about that in years, but that was, my very first job was delivering papers as I don't even know what I would have been. 12
how old were you?
13, maybe.
13.
Something like that, yeah.
So by the time you were 22, 23, you had 10 years of work experience. You learned how to keep a schedule. You learned how to, like, you had accountability. You got customer feedback, right? You had your own money. You had your own income. You could do what you wanted with it, right? You had a goal. You took care of your family. You did whatever it was, right? And like, so you'd have these like NFL draft picks coming out of college. And is your video working okay?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh,
Was it skipping for you, or I think?
Yeah, you're frozen, but we'll just keep rolling.
Just keep going, because Riverside. Oh, actually, you know what we'll do? Because I will just cut this little part out. I'll give a little pause for about 30 seconds, and then I see where it is in the editing. The great thing about Riverside is it's constantly uploading. And so even if, I should have mentioned that before, even if you freeze, the video will be perfect, the audio will be perfect, unless it completely drops. So so I'll just give a 30-second pause here, and then I'll just do a quick cut.
Perfect.
That's fine. We don't need 30 seconds. I just need a blank spot.
Awesome. So you had that at 13, right? You learned about holding a schedule. You learned about accountability. You learned about responsibility. You had a customer service. You got chewed out. You got feedback. Back in those days, sometimes you had to collect the money. Remember? Like, we'd have to go around and collect and like pay that out and do those parts of it. So, there are a lot of kids today coming out of college at 20, 21, 22, 23 years old. It doesn't matter if you're a professional athlete going into the NFL or whatever, right? And you might get a paycheck, and it's the first one you've ever had. It's the first time that you've ever been chewed out by a boss that wasn't like a family member or a coach, right? Like, you weren't and we did this, and we assessed this across literally draft picks in professional sports on down to work. And it was consistent and uniform all the time. It was a direct correlation to early career success on how old are you when you got your first job and why. Okay. And then the second part of this was around understanding risk and return on your time. Okay. Because would you rather, work for 10 hours at $10 an hour, right? And do that predictably? Or would you rather work for between 0 and 20 hours with the potential of $100? Meaning you could be less, or it could be more, right? And you could have this question, and like, you can kind of pick that, but then you could also plot where you like, there's a secondary degree of risk there, right? Or of risk management, where you go from how you like to make money or compensated, right? So do you want to have a quota? Do you want to have this? Do you want to have that, right? Do you want variable income? But the second part of that was then, what sort of organization should you fit into? Like, you might be an accountant that you want something very predictable and very, and very this. However, you want to do that at an earlier stage, more risky environment. So like, you want to be earlier stage and more risk, but you don't want variable income, right? And you kind of have these parts of it, and you could really plot this and help people learn a ton. And I'm convinced that for entrepreneurs, that we have a natural desire, and it doesn't matter what type of entrepreneur. We think we're all unique in tech. No, like, I was at a restaurant yesterday where Fleur, who opened it up, just said, "Hey, I want to go do this." Figured it out. It was an empanada It was the greatest empanada I've ever had in my life, and she's already profitable in her first year doing this entire thing. Incredible, right? And it doesn't matter. But it's like, okay, it turns out if you actually go through the route here and then you go through all the data, every one of us probably started doing things like that, lawn mowing, newspapers, name the thing at 10, 12, 13 years old. And then in parallel, we have like an outsized ability to manage risk.
Yeah, absolutely could see
or
that.
be comfortable with risk. You not be able to manage risk, but you're comfortable with risk. And, you kind of bring those two things and here we are.
It's funny because it's sometimes I don't want to say it's blind to risk, but with entrepreneurs, there's a bit of an unnatural belief in ourselves in some way, right?
Suspended disbelief. Yeah, absolutely. Like you have a natural, you can accept risk and you can deal with ambiguity, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And thrive on it. In fact, like I do remember when even I had that first, now I call it my first job, but it was my first job post-university that I feel is my first real job.
Yep.
Had a dozen of those jobs beforehand that were like summer job, evening job, weekend job, all those, right? But one of the things that I remember, besides me wanting to just build something, but it was one of the things that annoyed me the most was like, just like you said, there's a cap on my salary. There's a cap there. And I'm like that, if I work harder, it doesn't matter. If I work less, it doesn't matter. If I'm smart, it doesn't matter. And I wanted the ability to, I might make zero, but I'm pretty convinced I can make more. And it wasn't all about money, but I could build something and I could always find opportunity. And I think, it's something, it's a natural, like I would say, especially in sort of finance and business areas, my risk tolerance is ridiculous. I'm in like a tech startup. It's ridiculous. What other people sometimes think are risky, I won't do. Like a friend of mine invited me over for happy hour in a casino not too long ago. We had happy hour and he walked up and I'm like, I'm not putting anything in there. And he goes, yeah, because you can do math. It wasn't risk. I weighed the odds and went, no, that's stupid.
Jump out of a tree guy. Does that make sense? Like
exactly.
I'm not like climbing mountains. I'm not running ultras. You know what I mean? Like I'm not like
it's not that kind of risk.
It is like a professional risk. You know what I mean? Kind of on that part of it. And then and then do you think about what you do during your work hours, right? As your work and your craft or a job? And if you're like, hey, I want a job to enable these other things, then fantastic. Probably don't start a business.
Yeah.
But if you're like, well, no, like if I'm going to be spending my time on this thing, I want to be able to do something that is like my craft. It's matters. Like, I want to go and do that. And you're like, all right, if it's your craft, then like, and you can accept the risk and you can, and you have this part of it, it'll be okay. Like, go for it. Like, what's the worst that can happen? Well, those 9 other things on that list. Right.
Yeah, you find those out over a lot of years. Like my last job was 2003 or something, or 2, or actually, I think it was 99 or 2000. So I'm, a quarter century of learning the hard way that I don't know everything. There's always these battles.
But it's not about just standalone entrepreneurial and survey analytics, because you'd have to actually say, let's run the same survey on other professions. Doctors, lawyers, teachers, like you name it, and you go do it all. And I bet you there's a lot of lawyers that would say, like, same stats, but like 22% would say I would do the same thing again.
Yeah.
Doctors might be similar, teachers might be in the middle,
Yeah, very true. I've never thought of that.
Yeah, it needs to be comparative analytics, not just singular.
Yeah, yeah. And, so I want to circle back a little bit here because I know, okay, your story, unfortunately, is a familiar one where, like you said, you grow, you have investors, you have a board, and then suddenly people think they're smarter, and I hear that story too often with entrepreneurs, and it's unfortunate. I know a friend of mine has to have a drinks with him the other day, and he just looked at me, he goes, he says, when you're an entrepreneur, sometimes you're punished if you're a success and you're punished if you fail. Like, yeah, it's kind of, you're right. It sort of is. But so you ended anyway, you had an opportunity and you went, okay, we got this all sorted. But there's that day where, and I've sold a business before too. There's that day where you wake up the next day and go, well, now what? And so what was that day when you woke up after from college to that point, you were working on this and suddenly you wake up and go, now what do I do? What's next?
So that was one of like the that was one of the darkest moments in my life, actually. I didn't even have a personal email address. Like, why would I? HireVue was my life since I was 20, right? Like it was nuts. And it happens. And then I had a 2-year-old at the time. I had another baby on the way to a month from like my last day at HireVue. And like, listen, like no one needs to cry for me. I was gonna be just fine. Doesn't make sense, like economically, lifestyle wise, all the kind of various things. Like that's fine. But like this is truly like this was my being, my ball of clay, my entire part of it. I had already been out of the seat, back in the seat, kind of you name it, right? Like this was my thing. And more importantly, like I was like, I was right, kind of this whole thing. And I did that part of my life so terribly that it's the thing I want to talk to the most people possible about when they leave their businesses. I didn't have a personal email address. That was like an identity question. That was like crazy. Yeah. Does that make sense? Like it was so weird, right? And then I'll always remember this. One of our investors, one of the good guys, said, "Hey, I want you to show up on Monday to our IC meeting, like our Monday meeting." I'm like, "Why do you want me to do that?" And he's like, "Because you need a reason to shower." And I'm like, yeah, but like, he's like, "What are you gonna do?" I'm like, "Oh, I'm gonna," and he's like, no, just it was Clint Peterson. He's like, "Just come." And I was like, "All right." So I like show up to this like seed stage fund. I'm like in like a suit. I'm like, "We're gonna do this part of it." And I sit there and this guy comes in and he's pitching his business. One of the other partners, Ben Capel, goes, "Hey, like, so meet Mark Newman. He just left HireVue and he's gonna kind of help us out a bit. We've known Mark forever, whatever." And he goes, "Oh, cool. So he just left." I said, "Yeah." He's like, "What are you going to do now?" And I sat there and I like near broke down, right? I sat there and I was like, and I like blabbered for 5, 8, 10 minutes. And at the end, the guy was like, "Whoa, okay. So you got a lot to figure out." I'm like, "Yeah, yeah." Yep. Anyways, keep going, kind of like get rolling, right? And I was like, I am the only person in the world that this happened to. I can't believe this happened. Like this happened to me, all the various cycles of grief and this and that. And I had a 2-year-old that I was actually finally hanging out with. I had a baby coming right on the way. And my wife, Amber, she has put up with me since we were 16 years old through all of this, right? Kind of on here. And this was even before we sold the business. I left right before we sold the business. And this part of it. And then out of nowhere, a guy named Paul McKinnon, he was a Harvard Business School professor at that point. Previously, he had been CHRO of Citigroup and Dell. And like, I'd always tried to like pitch him for business and, you name it, right? The whole thing. We knew some people in common. He was bringing us into Citi, right? He was retiring, then going to Harvard. Calls me out of the blue. And all of a sudden on my phone, it says Paul McKinnon. And I'm like, whoa, CHRO's calling me. This is a really big deal. I don't know if he knows, that I'm not there, kind of all those things, right? That happen.
Yeah.
And I answer the phone and I'm like, "Hey, this is Mark." He's like, he's like, "Paul McKinnon." I'm like, "Oh yeah. Hey, Paul, how's it going?" He's like, "Oh, it's good. I just felt like I wanted to call you." "Thanks. What's going on?" Like trying to have like a happy face, right? Kind of with this. And I'm like, "Yeah, what's going on?" And he goes, "Well, I'd heard that you'd left." And I'm like, "Yeah, yep. I did." And, you're supposed to always have like the talking points and "Oh, this is really great. And they're going to leave it to the next generation," all the crap, right? That you're supposed to have and go do. And he goes, "Yeah." He's like, "Just listen for a couple minutes, if you don't mind." I'm like, "Sure. What's going on?" And he just starts telling me about when he was, at a company and this thing happened and this CEO came in. He's like, "Do you know who this person is?" I'm like, "Well, I don't know him, but I know the name, like some big CEO, and this played out this way." And, and he goes, and he's just telling me, just talking, and then this, and he's like, "And when that happened, I thought my like entire career was over, and I go, "Yeah." And I was kind of quiet. He's like, "You still there?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm still here." And he goes, and I was like, thanks for that." He goes, "Yeah, I'd heard the news and I just felt like I needed to call you because I wanted to make sure you knew that you weren't the only person that this ever happened to." And I sat there and I was like, I don't know what divine thing, you know what I mean, was like meant, kind of meant to do that. But like that moment in time, like picked me up from like the deepest depths, kind of on this part of it. And I was like, like, all right, like we're going to kind of go do this. I'd already been playing around with like, I had an experience when my first son was born that became what Nomi is today, right? Like where, it's lovely person comes into our hospital room, says, congratulations on your new baby. And I'm like, thank you. And I'm like, who are you? She's like, I'm from finance. I'm here to talk to you about your bill. And, and I was like, what? And she's like, I'm like, what's the bill? And she's like, $4,500. This is the insurance company price, whatever. And I had the ability to pay her right then and there. She had no idea who I was, had no idea my resources. I could pay a $4,500 bill. And I said, well, I don't want to do a payment plan. What if I pay the whole thing? She goes, well, if you pay the whole thing, I'll take 30% off right now.
Wow.
And I sat there and like, this is your world, right? This is like your whole thing. That wasn't a healthcare problem. That wasn't a clinical problem. That was a good old fashioned business problem, right? That I solved for that hospital. And I was like, I just had this huge benefit cost increase at HireVue. I know everything that's going on inside of our people. Why wouldn't I do this for everybody? I did all the hiring for all these insurance companies. All I do is hang out with his employers. They buy all sorts of benefits. I'm going to go talk to them. Like, because I'd had this problem and I was so angry about it. And I was like, I play around with it and I was like, no, it turns out if I show up with money, I get a lower price of healthcare. So why don't we build the system that way? And, and I was like, I don't know if I'll do another thing. And we're having another baby. And Paul said that to me, and I was like, yeah, you're right. Like, I'm going to go create something else. And that's what I'm saying. Sometimes good news is bad news. If I stayed at HireVue, I'd still be there. Right. And I'd be 25 years in, and I'd still be kind of like doing that. And I'd already given away 90% of the company, you know what I mean, to investors. And I'd already do that part of it. And I'd kind of gone through that entire thing. And instead, I can look at that as all of life tuition that, and all those experiences that then set us up to then really go build the thing that, maybe in this life I was supposed to go build. And that's what we've been doing, building Nomi for the last 6 years. And it's been a while, but it is not this to this. It is not even, kind of this. It is like, and kind of on there and it affects your family and it affects the people that put up with you and it affects, Amber that's been around me and what was kind of most funny full loop story. I don't know if I've ever actually shared this publicly, but what's funny about it was at one point in time, I was like, I'm buying HireVue back. Like I'm getting my baby back, kind of on here. And Amber, my wife said, well, you have to pick me or HireVue. And I go, really? You know what I mean? Like kind of on this. And she's like, yeah, because like, if you go back in, like you were going in like with war. Does that make sense? Like, you're not going to go in your best self. You're not going to go in and be the creator. You're not going to go in to do this. Like you're going to go in and be like, kind of on here. And I go, maybe. And this was like in like the kind of exit process that I was going to be like that part of it. And I go, maybe. And she goes, great. But they don't need to know that you have to pick me or HireVue. So go do what you're going to go do. And it was kind of that part of it. And then we got to an outcome that worked for everybody.
Yeah.
And they've built an incredible organization. And I'm proud of that was my work and that was my craft. And finding out when people get hired through that way, and all those things, it's like one of those greatest like gifts in life. But I just had to realize, like, just like raising kids, you're not always part of their life the whole time. You know what I mean? Like, and building HireVue and then like saying, I not only have an identity of being a creator to do other things, right? And to do it, but that will always be part of my legacy and always part of my life. Like, my God, I get to go do this again.
Yeah. Yeah. I can feel like when you're talking about that, like I had a business, I had a creative agency before Dryrun, and it was a professional services business. And it got to that sort of inevitable, I guess, I don't know if it was inevitable. It turned out in the end to be inevitable, either buy or sell, basically. Totally. And it's not a big exit when it's a professional services company or anything like that. And it ended up I sold. And I can relate. I woke up that next morning and I still remember kind of standing and I'm like, you're almost like, I don't even know where to move. Like, I don't even know if I can lift my foot up to take a step. Right. I had a personal email address, no email coming in. Totally. And it's like you literally have withdrawal from, instead of hundreds of emails and everybody needs you, to nobody needs you. Right. Right. And it's interesting looking back, because I think part of developing Dryrun, I didn't know what to do. I went out and incorporated a company. I think a week later, with nothing in mind. I just needed something. I needed
So
a
you're working
name.
on a thing, yeah.
So I had a thing. And then I was messing around with consulting here and there. And then I would go and have coffee or beer with entrepreneurs. I would say I sat down with 40 or 50 of them, everyone I knew, and had a bit of this inkling, which eventually became Dryrun. But I think part of it was just, I needed something. I needed is
Needed a
probably
purpose.
therapy looking back. Right? But
It's
it
like,
ended up being the same thing, the best thing that ever happened to me. Right?
yeah. It's like the Acquired podcast reason. There was an interview about from Jamie Dimon, right? And his like famous firing, right? And it's like, it's part of his like folklore and fairy tale about who he is and who he became. And he's like, yeah, so for 18 months from when I left one to before I did another one, like I was getting called by recruiters. I was thinking about this. Finally, I just had to get in the office so I could go and show up somewhere. And like I went to lunch and I was trying to figure this out and place this out. And you're like, we put these people on altars. Does that make sense? And like and podiums and this and that. And it's like no, it turns out that like Jamie Dimon went through that too, right? Like Elon Musk, he and I have two things in common. One, we both got moved out of our businesses while we were on our honeymoons, and two, it was by the same VC firm or people associated with it. Like it was like their playbook, and I'm like, no, never met the guy, never a part of it, but like I also know that feeling right after. And like when you kind of go do it, or you've got like all the greats and all the people that we put on like these pedestals, turns out went through the same thing, and all of our friends that are really kind of in that world, like we've all felt that feeling, right? And we've all like kind of do it. And maybe the way to solve that problem of loneliness and that problem of aloneness and that problem of those feelings and those 9 things is the fact that like maybe just maybe we can be open about it. And talk about it and not, and just say that was a part that formed me. Like we're going to go build this thing, not dwell on it, move on, on there. But who knows?
Yeah. Well, and the thing is, like entrepreneurs, like you said, they all go through it, but nobody says anything. And all you have to do is look at the stats and go like, only small business, only 50% of them make it to their 5th year. In tech innovation companies, only 10% are successful. And you're like, well, that means 90% of entrepreneurs are doing the same thing we did when you wake up in the morning and go, well, I don't know what's next, right?
And your family remembers it and your kids remember it and they remember the feeling and they know what it was like, and some embrace it and some want to run from it, and never like do something totally different, and like you name it.
Yeah, exactly. And it's but I look back now and I'm like, again, I wouldn't do anything else. And I'm so it ended up being the kind of, again, sort of the best thing that ever happened to me because I'm onto something I'm really passionate about. And I want to circle in a bit, like you see this, because it's also this interesting. You came up with this idea like, okay, I got this bill. I got 30% off of my bill. What is going on here? How did that turn into Nomi? Like, I kind of want to get into how that worked into what you're doing now and how this incident that happened to you turned into a business where you're really moving the needle.
Yeah. So, you always think you're not like your parents, and then it turns out you are more like your parents than you think. You start first looking to like them, then you start sounding like them, and then you realize like you kind of do think some of the same ways. Well, on the thing some of the same ways, my dad, like I said, like ran, managed copper smelters. Like that was his thing. And I never really knew what that meant. You know what I mean? Kind of on there. But then I finally met his boss, like way after retirement and all this. And he goes, he's like, I think you and your dad are the same way. I'm like, what do you mean by this? I never took a chemistry class. You know what I mean? Like this part of it. And he goes, you're both systems thinkers. And he's, kind of on there. He's like, a copper smelter is a giant system. He's like, when you're telling me about Nomi and HireVue, he's like, it's just a giant system in Komoot parts. I'm not a developer. I'm not a, kind of all these different parts of it, but I do think I naturally think in like systems, and like how you could kind of orchestrate the systems and go do this. I had 2 sisters that were, both in the medical field. One runs clinical trials, one's an ER doc. Naturally, parents always think they're smarter than you. However, a lot of times in healthcare, especially US healthcare, we think every problem in healthcare is unique to healthcare. Like in this industry, there's things called RVUs, which are essentially digital currency units that have been created so that doctors have to produce a certain number of RVUs on a daily and weekly basis. In other industries, we would call this value add activities or quota, or whatever, right? But we don't want to tarnish a doctor in thinking that they're, kind of going and doing this. And like, so there's like subunits, there's these CPT codes instead of invoice numbers or SKUs, right? There's this, there's that. But it's a $5.5 trillion disaster. Like the US healthcare market is the 3rd largest independent economy in the world. Okay. Every year. just like dumps the money and kind of goes and does this. And we like to think, like, we picture in our mind healthcare as being this white coat moment, that delivery of healthcare at that magic moment in time that helped you when you did something stupid, saved a life of, kind of on this part of it, whatever it was. But there's the delivery of healthcare, and that's what we imagine it is. And then there's the business of healthcare, which is really like what drives it to run the way it is and how costly it is and how bad it is. Okay. This problem, when I saw this was not a delivery of healthcare problem. My delivery of healthcare was great. I had a new baby. Like, this was fun. This was like a good old fashioned business problem. And this was a business, and this was time is money. She knew when I walked out that door that, like, if she didn't get paid now, would never get paid again, or would have write-offs, or would have this, or would have that part of it. And that was a good old fashioned business problem. I'm like, okay, so how do we do this? Well, fortunately, I'd helped a lot of really interesting people hire a lot of people. So, so I had my own like technical partner, Lauren Larson. I got introduced to Josh Walker, who became my other co-founder. He was like, of the three amigos, like, I was the HR guy, he's the healthcare guy. And then there was a third amigo, and that's a guy named Bo Hartman. So he was chief digital officer at Goldman Sachs. He built Apple Card and Marcus there. He was like fintech guy, kind of on this. Before that, he was like Capital One and Barclay Card. Why I knew that is because I did hiring for him at Barclay Card. I did work for Capital One, and I got to know him at Google and at Goldman, and did work for him. So I was like, this sounds like a fintech problem, because I would do this for every one of my employees. So why couldn't the employee go get the care, right? Have this like rate opportunity available, but have that tap into a bank account. You know what I mean? Like, that's at the employer. And he's like, well, yeah, it's kind of like a purchasing card. This is how it could work. This is that. I'm like, tell you what, you can help the rich get richer, or you should finally do something with your life. Why don't you come join in and, kind of come do this? And then I was like, oh yeah, and I've been working with HR people for a long time. And as a function, as like a species, right? Like, in general, it's like kind of a bit scared of our own shadow, and like we need to like be grounded in facts and like be able to go have business conversations, on here. Got it. So we can't just show up and say, this could work. We need to show up and be able to say, let's take all your spend, let's ground it in fact and truth. And not just say, this could work, but literally say, here's where you spend your money. And like, this is what this new rate could be, and then facilitate that, right? So now today we have the largest analytics platform for self-insured healthcare. On this, 17 million lives, almost $100 billion to spend on that. We then said, all right, we need to facilitate this payment model. So we built our own direct-to-provider payment system. And we have our own bank trust, which we, got in Nebraska, and have that to run there. So know your data, move your money. And then we started just saying, how can we create relationships with providers to replicate this experience over and over again? And what that was, it wasn't just, let me get a rate and we're going to have copays and deductibles and all this kind of other nonsense. I was like, what's the real price of healthcare if we take you out of the collection business? And like, we completely reorient the system to not be slow and stupid, but to be fast, real time, data driven, and like focused on you delivering service and getting paid for it right now. What is that price? And that doesn't come from an incumbency. That comes from a new start that doesn't have to rely on the fact that we've done all this the same way. And so that was like the systems thinking side of it, of like how to go do that. We we also ended up having a ton of fun during the pandemic. That sounds terrible, but working for states and bringing our model, doing that and other things like this. But it was that. And then the other part was market knowledge and market awareness, right? Kind of bringing that in, where it was like, no, it turns out like largest employers have the biggest problems and actually adopt solutions first versus SMB and go up. And here's, like how you kind of go and navigate this both on an employer side, fintech side, and a healthcare and a healthcare side. And that's what I'm saying. Like, good news, bad news, good news, right? Because you wouldn't have ever got out of that rut, and then you got to kind of bring all those things together and go do it. And that's Nomi today.
So who should be getting in touch with you if they want to talk with you about Nomi or anything? And who are the people that, I want to talk to today?
For sure. So in our world, like, if you're a self-insured employer, so about $1 trillion of spend in America is bought and paid for by employers. And we're like, why do you go rent all these things from all these insurance companies and whatever? You should be able to do this yourself. You know how to buy stuff. If you buy $1 trillion of healthcare, you spend $6 or $7 trillion on other things. You know how to buy stuff. So we should have you buy your doctors and buy care from your doctors and pay them directly for it. Rebuild healthcare this way. It turns out it's 20, 30, 50% lower cost than what it traditionally is. So like you want to do something about your healthcare costs and at the same time give no copays and deductibles to your people so they love you, right? And you become an employer of choice. You're that type of employer, come join us. Our main adopters are business owners, CEOs, CFOs that are totally fed up with how healthcare works, right? So come join us there. And then any health system, any doctor's clinic, you name it, that's also fed up with like dealing with the noise of trying to figure out how to get paid for work that you do. Reach out to Nomi, reach out to us at nomihealth.com, NOMIhealth.com, and we'll get you part of the Rebel Alliance for us to go fight the empire.
That's terrific. I'll make sure that's down in the show notes. So please check out nomihealth.com. This is absolutely revolutionizing healthcare in the United States. So I'm wish you guys all of the luck in the world, because it's an enormous problem, trillions of dollar problem that you guys are helping to solve. So good on you for that. And if you are a CFO or you're part of a finance team and you're building spreadsheets for your cash flow, come and talk with us, because we're going to help you give visualizations and clarity to the management team so they can make really smart decisions. We're going to get your data cleaned up, accurate, and we're going to save you a ton of time every single week. So come and see us at dryrun.com and we'll help you out. Thanks again, Mark. This was a really fun conversation.
Thanks for having me.